So once again, I'm delighted to be joined by Lesia, who is a political analyst and published author in various publications, very outspoken, etc. Well, you all know who she is, and you know some of the things that she said in the past. Today, we're going to be talking about the rising tide of authoritarianism and how Ukraine is one of the few places on earth who have been consistently resisting that, not only through the 90s, but in the 2000s, and in multiple revolutions and now full-scale war. But autocracy and authoritarian slide seems to be accelerating in many parts of the world. We're going to try and unpack that. Lesia, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with USAid, because I think we were talking about that before we hit record. And of course, USAid was designed to extend democratic values, institutions, processes around the world. It has now just been shut down, and there's no certainty about whether it will ever be revived. Was this a surprise to you? What do you think the impact of this is going to be?
No, it's not. It wasn't a surprise at all. I think it's a very long-standing issue, and I've heard about this before. And during the first Trump's administration, he was quite critical of it. And people who work for USAID, they knew about this. They kind of prepared for it. To the extent that it happened, I don't know. I don't work for the USAID. I would say that generally what they're doing, I mean, I understand why they're doing it because USAID has different types of programs. So it has the so-called programs that are, by my standards, truly necessary, right? So that pertains basically to medication, food, assistance to those who are truly vulnerable. So that is extremely important. And that is the way Marco Rubio would put it, in the best interest of the US, because you don't want malaria or some other things, spreading around the world. So you would rather help people on the spot, with all sorts of things, be it in Africa or somewhere else. I'm talking about, like, the general kind of virus situation, or just people not having food, which is a big deal, right? So that I fully support. Other USAID programs, it depends. So I think what is going to happen, and I must emphasize that there is a blanket waiver when it comes to these kind of essential programs that USAID does. So that one is happening, like, the funds are still there. When it comes to other programs which are promoting different things, well, I know some. I don't want to go too deep inside this rabbit hole, because there will be things that people will terribly dislike about USAID and what it funds and so on. Just let's be diplomatic here for once and say that some of okay, maybe not so diplomatic. Some of the things that USAID spends money on is shit. It's complete shit, and it should not be funded. And this has nothing to do with DEI or some other, like, gender LGBT kind of stuff. It's just like, what are you funding? Is I don't want to, like, point to some agencies, but different stupid movies and so on abroad. Why would you do that is a mystery to me. Even as a Ukrainian, let alone as an American. Like, if I were an American, I'd be very surprised to hear where my funds are going. So that kind of stuff I don't support. The other NGOs that are being funded by the USAID, for example, that pertain to helping the veterans or some other initiatives, they're important for sure. And I hope that they will remain in place once all this review is done, because they're truly necessary. That is something that is beneficial to society at large. Other programs, I don't know. But again, it's not up to me how the US spends its money, or and how the American taxpayers are funding different things. I just think that there is a certain need to review what's going on in that agency, because a lot of money is going, you know, to things that are just, they're just bad, and they shouldn't be funded. So I'm being optimistic. I think that hopefully at some point, once everything is reviewed, because I listened to what Marco Rubio has to say. He's the acting director of the USAID now, right? And he said yesterday that he wants the aid to continue, but it has to have a different form. If it's a form that is still beneficial to Ukraine and the initiatives that are necessary, not just Ukraine, then absolutely, why not? Do your job and go through all the programs and decide what to shut down and what not. I think it's also kind of healthy because it's bloated.
That's very much the argument put forward by people like Joe Lindsley and others, and that this has been building for many, many years, and there's been a lack of willingness to really grasp the nettle and deal with this. The challenge on the ground, of course, is that if you presume that some of this funding will boot up again in 90 days, I think there are two problems here. One is, what are the criteria you use for success? You need to have a clear and distinct foreign policy, as well as clear and distinct social policies in order to judge which organizations to fund, because you need to have objective and strategic outcomes in order to judge them against. Those things do seem to be lacking. In fact, there seems to be something of a tussle within the Trump regime about what those objectives should be. There's no clear statement of them. The other one, of course, is that let's assume you're running a kind of NGO that is doing good work, that is putting forward, say, a civic society message or promoting democracy. Well, that organization might not exist in 60 days, 90 days' time. It might have gone to the wall. And all the people doing those work most certainly would have had to go and seek other employment. It could also be in someone like Georgia that this pause for 90 days makes the difference between democracy triumphing and authoritarianism snuffing them out. I mean, these are two of the main objections that I'd put forward to the way it's being done, not necessarily the why it's being done.
Listen, I'm not part of the administration, so I don't know whether they lack those objectives or not. It doesn't seem like they fully lack objectives. It seems like they have a more or less clear agenda going on. And I think what we should expect in the next 90 days, that most of the programs that fund USAID, like, that fund some kind of cultural things, or some kind of I don't know, LGBTQ plus kind of things, some kind of diversity things. I think they will all go under the current administration, because that's part of their policy. That's what they're doing in the US, right? So I mean, it's not just about Ukraine, Georgia, or some other country out there. It's about what they're doing inside the US as well. So I think that their agenda is more or less clear. What will stay? I mean, okay, how many NGOs promoting civic things are necessary? That I don't know. So, I mean, one per oblast in Ukraine, two per oblast, you know what I mean? Because currently, I don't know the current number of NGOs doing that, but I can guarantee you that there are many, a lot. If maybe it would make sense for them to merge. I can give you a nice example actually of because I sometimes talk to Ukrainian media and local media too. So, there was this example, I think in the summer, yeah, in the summer of 2024, I was reached out by this local media and they were looking for funding. USAID included, any funding, local media. Working in Sumy Oblast, I'm not gonna name it, and they had a very specific niche. For example, they inform the locals about some kind of new medical assistance happening in the region, and they wanted money because obviously this doesn't, who's gonna fund that media? They wanted money. They wanted, like, grant money. And I listened to them carefully, and their ambitions were to get a grant from the National Endowment for Democracy. And I was just honest with them. I was like, do you think that the National Endowment of Democracy or any other grant maker out there is supposed to fund you? Why won't you explore other options? Why won't you, like, why would you apply as a separate media altogether? Perhaps it makes, from a financial point of view and efficiency point of view, to at least merge into becoming something more effective. So that your media outlet doesn't cover Sumy Oblast only and the medical assistance provided there. But for example, Sumy, Kharkiv, I don't know, Chernihiv Oblast, a larger entity that still serves a purpose, but is using that money in a more efficient manner. and they get really upset was what I said. So and it's like I do believe that there are at the moment perhaps too many things, like they're still doing good, but you can do the very same thing in a more efficient manner. That's my point. And I think that for example, when it comes to the media or the local media, you need to understand really how to organize that process, because every day somebody creates a new media. Every day somebody creates a new channel. How do you go about that? I mean, what's like, how many media channels do we need? I don't know. I don't know. That's an open-ended question. But the point I'm trying to relay here at the end of the day is that there is a certain demand for more efficiency. And I think that big organizations that deal with these things in Ukraine, very well established and so on, they will remain in place.
The other aspect, of course, of this is the geopolitical aspect, and China has already made some noises that they will step in to fund some of these programs with the US withdrawing. Now, I find it very difficult to believe they would fund any program that advances civic society or democracy or any of these. They may well step in and support the health programs that are being defunded. One could see that happening because it's part of their soft power process. But here's an interesting question. We don't know what the strategic objectives of the new US administration are. We just have noises at this point. Some of those noises are distinctly undemocratic. It's picking fights with democratic allies, not really talking in any way about Ukrainian victory from the point of view of democracy triumphing. Rather, it's a much more transactional kind of approach because if Russia is the big enemy, then defeating it's going to make Trump look good. And of course, these conversations about rare earth resources, there's no mention of democracy. There's no mention of civic society. There's no mention of the values that were considered, I would say, bipartisan in the post-World Two world order. Which are no longer seem to be the priority. So you say these programs are going to start up again. There's no guarantee whatsoever that advancing democracy will be of any concern whatsoever to the people that restart them.
Why do we care? I mean, if you
We care because democracy is precious
no,
and
no,
wealth
no,
comes from freedom and democracy.
no, listen, why do we care if it's their priority or not? If they give that money to NGOs in Ukraine that promote democracy, then it doesn't really matter to
My
us.
argument isn't they won't. My argument is that it's very likely that when this boots up again,
Yeah.
those charities will not be getting the funding.
Which
That's my
charity?
point.
Exactly.
So this could be media organizations, it could be those that are promoting um, transparency, holding government to account. I mean, we know the ecosystem is vast. We know not all of them are going to be efficient, and it's a long process to judge. But by wiping them all out or removing funding, it does possibly say something about what the US government's priorities are. And if that funding is not going to go towards these kind of things, we've seen in Georgia, there's just not enough money in the country to create this civic society institutions. And even in Ukraine, a lot of the democratic resilience that it has developed has been done so very much with support of external funding because ultimately Ukraine was a poor country in the 90s. Georgia still is an incredibly poor country where Russian oligarchs control a huge swathes of the economy.
Well, I think that to begin with, I'm not sure that it will be cut off the way you say. So I think that a lot of them will stay. I don't think that all of it will go. Uh Reduced, perhaps. Yes, I expect something like that. But like I said in my previous answer, I expect like big organizations, I don't know, like Internews or whatever, to keep receiving that money from the USAid. I don't think that this will altogether just be folded. Maybe I'm wrong, but the like the kind of talk that you say that Trump doesn't talk about democracy triumphing or something else. Again, to me, this is like, yeah, okay. The Biden administration talked a lot about democracy and values, and here we are. Here is the result, right? So, if I'm to choose between sweet talk, sugar coating, and so on, and the more blunt kind of talk, then I prefer the blunt talk because at least you know where you stand with the blunt talk. Because when there's a person constantly smiling at you and saying that like Ukraine is this bastion of democracy. Yes, but why do you provide 31 tanks to the bastion of democracy? So you gotta decide, is there whether if people are into talk, then obviously you can, I don't know, fund even more NGOs. Fund is like, talk about all these things, but we need to get things done. And like I talked today with a person who is very knowledgeable when it comes to critical resources and stuff, and military industry in Ukraine. And the good news is that there is potential there. There is potential of some kind of transactional stuff going on because that's how any security model or any security guarantees are supposed to be buttressed with, right? You can't expect other countries, even if it's not the US, the UK, somebody else, to provide military aid endlessly, just like that. It's impossible. Let's face it, it's impossible. It's been 3 years into the war. So it will get more difficult every year. It's a guarantee. It will get more difficult. So you need some kind of understanding, how do we proceed? Because Ukraine's goals, they're not different. We still want the 1991 border. We still want, like, Ukraine and NATO, even though I don't know whether it's gonna happen. I'm not a big believer in that, but we want at least all of our country back. So how do we get there? By asking every year the US and everybody else for 60 billion? Well, guess what? 60 billion won't won't help us to liberate that territory that is currently occupied. You need some kind of shock therapy. There has to be 10,000 tanks or something like that delivered to Ukraine in 1 month, not 8 months, 9 months, 1 month or so, together with other equipment and so on.
And an
Missiles.
intent to
Other,
crash the Russian
yes,
economy. I mean, that's
yes, yes.
key part of it.
It has to be shock therapy because otherwise it will turn into this kind of situation where every year we have to come and say like, can you give us more billions? And that's annoying not only for the Americans but for the Ukrainians too. You think we enjoying it or something? Especially like especially the journalists and the civic society, we so very much enjoy saying that like, please give us money to survive. I don't think so. I actually very much hate it. So, but there has to be a decision of some sort as to how we proceed. I'm more or less optimistic as to what I hear when it comes to all these rare earth materials, because this could be a possibility to build some kind of defense model. And the person I talked to just now before you, who is knowledgeable on the subject, said that even in times of, if say there's a ceasefire, even though I'm not a big believer in that, but okay, even if the ceasefire happens, there's certain level of let's call it, well, unpredictable, not okay. It's not the best economic situation for investors, but he said that this will not really matter because the rare earth materials market is very, very in demand when it comes to governments. Businesses, maybe not so much, but governments, a lot. So that is something that gives me certain optimism because otherwise, how are we going to proceed? How many more years? How many more people? How many more something?
Yeah.
So
And let's
right
face it, I mean, those extraction industries already operate in many countries where the state has practically ceased to exist. They operate in areas of failed states. They will often hire, security and all sorts of stuff to operate in these areas in places where, your traditional service-based industries and consumer-based industries will not go anywhere near with the barge pole. These extraction industries are used to working in highly authoritarian as well as failed states. Now, Ukraine is neither of those, so you can see that might have some possibilities.
Definitely. And I think that a very important part right now is to stop because Russia advances in areas that are not randomly chosen. They're like, okay, we're going to advance here. it chooses specific areas where those deposits are. And if you look at the map where the estimated deposits are in terms of value, it's the Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts, which are, the most valuable ones. So now, then the other big region which has these deposits apparently is Dnipropetrovsk region. I don't want Russia to step inside Dnipropetrovsk region. I must be very clear. I would rather have a ceasefire, no matter how shaky, but we need to stop them from advancing and taking our economic leverage. Isn't that obvious? Because, attaining the goal of 1991 border might take a little bit of time, but you need to somehow get there. And if you have no economic leverage, if you have no people, if you have nothing, then how will you get there? I really don't know. I don't understand why we keep talking about these things, because there must be something going on inside the country, and we have to pay the bills somehow, and we need to restore the economy as well. It's just how it is.
And of course, those who focus on extraction industries will bemoan the fact that much of that wealth doesn't get down to the people. Well, that's certainly the case in Russia. It's the case in many areas of Africa. I remain hopeful, however, that given the strength of civic society in Ukraine, that actually more of that wealth would trickle down, once those industries develop. And actually, it's been said that largely a lot of these extractive industries and industries based on hydrocarbon extraction have not even been developed yet. The surface has not even been scratched, literally
They're not
and
even explored
metaphorically.
yet. They haven't been even explored yet. So Ukraine, for the time being, again, this is I talked about this just now, like 20 minutes ago, that Ukraine lacks a policy when it comes to these critical resources. And I asked that person, like, why? It's been 34 years. Why? I'm not in the mood to criticize my beloved country and government, but we have a lot to go through because it's just despicable in a way, And the answer was that, it wasn't a priority.
Yeah.
There were easier things out there to set up, even for the oligarchs. It
I'm going to
wasn't a
say something kind of controversial here, but one of the strongest impressions I had of Kiev was how many kind of cozy, nice spaces there are to have coffee and exquisite pastries and brilliant places to have lunch. These are all places where people can meet and, they can discuss, they can meet, they can work. So Ukraine seems to be incredibly good at, I would say, connecting with these individual pleasures, which is actually fantastic. On the other hand, in Kiev, I noticed that a lot of buildings have clearly not been renovated
Oh
at
no.
all,
Mhm.
probably since, the 19th century. And a lot of stuff is just sort of crumbling and falling apart. So again, it sort of suggests that Ukraine has priorities, and certainly they're not all bad. In fact, some of those that give individual pleasure to people are fantastic, to be applauded. But generally speaking, there seems to be a sort of, I would say, underinvestment in infrastructure.
Underinvestment is a very soft word here. So I would say that, Ukraine, once we are back to a situation that's more or less normalized, Ukraine has a lot of homework to do. uh, a lot of homework from, I think I mentioned this in previous interviews, from the fact that we're developing missiles in 2024, and a lot of things like what in the actual, stuff. How is this possible? Ukraine is a large country with people with expertise, with people who are part of the Soviet Union, who know how these missiles work and how they're developed. Why didn't you make them? Why are we asking for those ATKMs or whatever they call tomahawks and stuff? You can develop it yourself. You could, but it wasn't your priority. See? And the very same applies to the rare earth materials and everything that could have been part of our defense model a long time ago, not just now. We could have developed, even without NATO, we could have developed something, but there was no appetite. Some of the politicians we had and some of our population, unfortunately, was very friendly toward Russia. Let's be honest. They didn't see it as a threat. Now, most of them have changed their minds, but they didn't see it that way. Okay, so how do we go, like, how do we go henceforth, you know? I mean, will we finally understand that the best security guarantee in the world, aside from NATO or something, is yourself and your ability to fight back? And thank God that Ukraine managed to do that in 2022, but that's not enough, you know, because back then Russia was also very, very opportunistic in its ways, right? It just grabbed some kind of kids and was like, yeah, go in, it's gonna be easy. It didn't turn out to be easy. But now they've learned their lesson a little bit and they're a little bit more professional, right? So we're dealing with an enemy who also understood us better. And which was not the case apparently in 2022. They thought that it was, you know, they'll be very easy. Now they know that it's not easy, and they're like, you know, they're strengthening their army and they're strengthening their whatever resource pool or whatever, and Ukraine has to do the same, because that's also how you eventually get into NATO if you want that. I mean, it's all very interconnected. It's not like, you know, one exists in a vacuum and the other one exists in another vacuum. No, it's not so. So I think that Ukraine must really do a lot of homework in order to just finally develop comprehensive policies. And those policies must be very, very, very comprehensive, whether it pertains to Euro integration, rare earth materials, economy, some kind of homegrown military industry, blah, blah, blah. But it has to be part of your plan. And not just randomly, okay, today we do this, tomorrow we're waking up and doing something else. That can't be the case.
That does give some, potential cause for hope, especially with Trump being sort of, I wouldn't even call the word erratic, but certainly he uses this idea that he's unpredictable in order to coerce both allies and enemies to do things that he wants. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. That may, we've got the twin pressure there, therefore, coming from that. One is for all NATO members to dramatically increase their spending. Now, it might not go up to the 5% because, as someone's pointed out, 5% of GDP is not 5% of your annual budget. It's a lot more than that. And just the idea of Germany spending 40% of its annual budget on defense alone, I mean, it's cloud cuckoo land, and it's probably unnecessary to go to that level. It would destroy the country and the economy. I mean, it literally would. However, going up to sort of 3.5% is probably more feasible. So we could see this move, albeit 3 years too late, to move countries towards actually paying for their defense when previously they've relied on the US to do that. That's vast amounts of money that could be used to buy military kit. And I think some of these countries are going to be quite loath to throw it all at the US, that's behaving as a sort of, I would call it a transactional empire or a sort of bully boy. They're going to want to develop their domestic industry. There's also the opportunity to develop Ukrainian military tech, and we've seen Denmark actually, rather than developing its own industry, giving huge amounts of expertise and funds to help Ukraine develop that, whether it's armored vehicles or new artillery systems. This apparently is going rather well. Ukraine has also increased its own domestic artillery production 25-fold since the start of the war. So these are rather interesting tendencies taking place in a less secure world. Ukraine could well be a major beneficiary of this.
I believe that all these processes are very beneficial for Ukraine, because otherwise, like, look, I understand why people dislike Trump. He's very, like, you know, it's difficult to like him on a personal level. Okay, on a personal level, it's very difficult to like him. But the things he does, some of them at least, not all of them, but some of them have the effect that is very much desired, because people, when he comes and says 5%, I think most people understand that, okay, that's probably not feasible, even though, for example, I did an interview with Estonia's ambassador to Ukraine, and she said that is feasible, you know? So, I mean, it also depends. But my point is that even if he gets, because obviously this is a negotiation technique. You come around and you demand something that is unattainable. You know that. But you're gonna keep pressuring everybody and you're gonna be this bad guy and so on. Do it, do it, do it, do it. Until you get to a point when you're like, okay, well, maybe 3.5% is fine, maybe 4% is fine. But regardless, it's not gonna be 2%, and it's not gonna be 1.2. That's the deal. Because still to this day, you have countries like Canada, Spain. Why is he targeting Canada so much? Well, there are reasons too. Nobody's impeccable. Canada has done a lot for Ukraine, but it can do much, much more if it wants to. The question is, does it want to? So, what I'm trying to say here is that, there's still countries that are part of NATO, and they can't hit the 2%. How? What has to happen in order for you to do it, to finally do it? What is it? Maybe I don't understand. The UFO landing somewhere with lasers, but then yeah, you don't need those 2% anymore, probably. But what I'm trying to say here is that I really don't know what else you need to see around you in order to make that decision. Because let's be honest, this should have happened probably in 2008 when Russia attacked Georgia. Okay, not enough. Georgia isn't something very interesting to you. Ukraine, something that is a little bit closer to the European Union. Georgia is a little bit far away by these standards, but Ukraine is bordering European Union, right? Three countries, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, right? Oh, sorry, Romania as well. Forgot. Um, it's bordering it. So okay, that's something closer, and you see that in broad daylight, people are annexing land and invading it. What do? Nothing. You did nothing. Well, what else? What else needs to happen? I don't know. I mean, I truly don't know. Then you see the invasion, the 2022 invasion, and finally France and Germany hit the 2% target. Patting themselves on the back, saying how great they are. No, you're not. This is something that you should have done a long time ago. And just because you were really, really forced to do it, and Germany is like uh, oh my God, it's the richest, one of the richest countries in the world, like in the European Union for sure. But it's like, you can't do that. Come on. Of course you can, but it's a matter of your own priorities. If it's not your priority, then you'll find excuses as to why you can't do. But if it is your priority and you understand that Russia is a threat and it's only get worse, it's gonna get worse, then you will do it. You will find money for those 5%, maybe even 10%.
And
But
of
it's
course, the
all,
US security coverage was there, whether you paid or not. You
yeah,
might have got
exactly. What would be your incentive?
harassed, but yeah, what's
Yeah,
the incentive?
exactly. So, the things Trump does at the end of the day, you can either choose to take advantage of them and do something about it that could lead to good results, or you can just say that, oh, he's not nice. No, he's not. You don't know about this? This is the first time I remember when I was a kid, I watched The Apprentice. He didn't seem very nice. But that somehow, yeah, but that somehow did not stop me from watching The Apprentice. I was actually looking forward to it.
That's yeah. That I watched the British version of that, and they're slightly more likable. Some people might dispute that. Alan Sugar was the host of the British version. Uh, Quite a character. Let's turn to probably another topic that we'll end on, but one which is nonetheless rather interesting. And there's this curious convergence, not just of Trump officials with, it has to be said, Putin's propagandists, but if you dig back into the record, you'll find that actually Biden and his team were saying this as well, and that is forcing or trying to put pressure on Ukraine to hold elections in wartime. Now, superficially, this might seem like a good idea, democratic legitimacy, what Ukraine is fighting for, is its state as a democracy, etc., etc. And Zelensky's term expired in May last year. But this isn't just a normal country, or even, dare I say, a normal war. As I said in an episode that I'm putting live this tonight, when Britain held elections, It only did so when Germany was comprehensively beaten and occupied. It was reduced to the point where it could not flare up and start fighting again. Unlike Napoleon, who kept popping up and re-kicking off the Napoleonic Wars. No, Germany was down and out. Britain and its institutions were not threatened in any way from that point. In any case, we have something called, the Channel in the way. It makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of invade. Russia is on the border of Ukraine. Russia has invaded how many times over the last couple of hundred years? And there's no guarantee that even if there's peace now, it would not kick off hostilities again. So it seems to me that this debate, and indeed the pressure from first Biden and now Trump's team, is really not reflecting the reality. We also know that Putin would use any potential elections to try and sow absolute chaos in Ukraine. He wouldn't just do this on the announcement. It's my belief that he's been investing already over the last sort of 8 months or so, at least, preparing for a moment where elections might be forced on Ukraine to try and destabilize it. What's your point of view?
Well, I think that to be honest, both the US and you are right in different ways. So there are pro arguments as to why we should have that election. And there are, counter arguments. Let's start with the pro argument. So, when it comes to holding the election in the current state, because okay, we couldn't in 2022, it was impossible. The front was all the time, like moving more or less all the time. 2023, also we had the counteroffensive, so on. But it wasn't supposed to be held by then. But what I'm trying to say here is that it was about also the front, right? Moving, because when there's like high intensity combat and so on, it's a little bit difficult. Right now, it's also high intensity, but it's very slow. The front is basically moving just a little bit in Donetsk Oblast, more or less. Yes, Zelensky, if I'm not mistaken, his term expired in May 2024. He still has a lot of backing from Ukrainians, so it's not like he is like, some kind of like Tucker Carlson claims, but Tucker Carlson is like, I'm sorry, just like a little point. Just want to like, say something about Tucker Carlson. I watched a little bit of the interview with Piers Morgan. I always thought that Tucker Carlson was at least a little bit more intelligent than he was. When
Oh,
I
he's clearly not very
He's
well informed
clearly
at
like
all.
he was like, I was shocked by the way he moved like this, like the entire interview, like laughing hysterically. Are you on drugs or something? But the point is that when he said that Zelensky was a dictator, and he seems to believe it in a way, I think that he seems to believe it, judging by the way he said it. I truly think that he might be believing it. And of course he's not a dictator. So that is something that, that Piers Morgan also challenged him and told him that, what are you saying, dude? Because it is stupid to say that. He's not a dictator. He's in power due to Ukrainian law that bans Ukraine from having elections during wartime. Whether that is right or not, I don't know. I mean, obviously it makes sense, right? Because wartime is wartime.
I mean, it's in the Constitution, right? If it's not correct, or if people deem it not correct, then with 75% vote, it can be overturned. But Americans above all should understand this. It's a constitutional matter. It's enshrined in the law and Constitution. If he held elections now without parliamentary approval and a change to the Constitution, it would be unlawful, and he would be acting as a dictator if he overrode that. So that it's a curious kind of argument.
Jonathan, it also says in the Ukrainian constitution that we're a social state. There are lots of things inside our constitution, but when I'm not saying that our constitution doesn't matter, but obviously you have to look at the bigger picture and what's going on. Because the Russian constitution also says, for example, that the land they annex is their land. Are we to recognize the Russian constitution? Of course not. Constitution is constitution. It's great. It's there. It should be there, but it shouldn't be like, oh my God, this is the only like gospel and that's it. It should be untouched. Every country has a constitution, and a lot of it is.
Oh, I mean, it can change, but there are democratic processes for changing constitution, and
Yes,
usually they
yes,
require
yes.
a
I think yes.
75%
So
threshold.
what I would say is that I'm sure that there is a desire. I can tell, even sense it, that there is a desire in Ukraine to hold elections. There is, because the system has, it's not that Zelensky is unpopular. He's still popular, and he might be still in power after the elections. He might be. It's a great actually possibility. But there has to be this process where you hear other opponents, because for example, Poroshenko, I'm not a big fan of Poroshenko at all. But he should be given a platform. Why is he not given a platform to say anything, more or less? Because they're constantly pressing, like, he is like saying that be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Well, he's still our politician. He shouldn't be quiet. And a lot of things he says when it comes to foreign policy, at least, makes sense. His domestic record is different, but his foreign policy record is good. Let's not lie. It's good. So I think that there is this perception in Ukrainian society that it's time to do it. The question is, how do you do it? Obviously. So how do you hold the elections? There are different ways, actually. So, for example, one of the ways is to do it the way Estonia does it. We all have the, like, 21 million of Ukrainians, at least, are users of the Dia app. The Dia app is this, I don't know, this go-to source where you can do everything, something that the West doesn't even know of. France or Germany is like, what
I,
Germany
I was
is like,
actually amazed when I was at the border crossing and someone showed their mobile phone to get through an international border, like
see?
passport or dear, and it was like, what on earth is going on? That was impressive.
Yes, we one of the reasons why our economy is so kind of, not economy, but like, the general setup of society is quite robust, is because we have a lot of digital services available. So this Dia is this go-to source app, and it has managed to withstand Russian aggression, because I'm sure that they targeted it too. It's a huge, huge thing. But somehow they managed to withstand it, and there's a lot of cooperation going on with Estonia, who also has it. And the question is, can you vote via Dia? Yes, you can for some things. Not for the elections yet, but you can. And it's not like you can just, interfere with your identity there. You can only have one Dia account. So is that a possibility? Could be. It could be tested to some extent. Yeah. 21 million other people who live abroad, you can go to the embassy. Why not? What's wrong with casting a ballot? Casting a ballot in Lviv isn't a problem at all, or some other parts of Ukraine. So the parts of Ukraine that are close to the front, now that's a different story. That will be a little bit difficult, because most likely Russia will shell them on the election day, and so on and so forth. But I wouldn't say that it's completely impossible. And I think that Ukraine, I don't think, I know. A lot of people in Ukraine are already preparing for the election, because we know that it's going to happen. And I think a lot of people want it to happen. But I would rather see it happening not in times of high intensity combat that is still going on in that front line, but and there's a little pause, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a big believer in ceasefire, but there has to be some kind of movement going on in terms of what we do next, right? So I wouldn't say that it's completely impossible to hold the election. And when it comes to Russia interfering and using disinformation, absolutely. But who do you expect to stand for that election? I mean, it will be Zelensky.
Yeah. It'll be
It
Mr.
will be, yeah,
Arestovich,
yeah.
although I
It will
don't know
be,
whether he'll
but it's
show his
not.
face in the country.
Even if Aristovich stands for that election, he has absolutely zero chance of
He has
winning.
zero chance of
Yeah,
getting even
it
a
is.
yeah.
I mean, you have to be realistic. The two candidates that will have maybe three, I don't know if Poroshenko suddenly becomes popular again. But let's say it's three candidates more or less. Zelensky, Zaluzhny, and Poroshenko.
Who's going to
if
win hands down? We know who's going
yeah,
to win hands down. It's
yeah,
Zaluzhny.
if Zelensky replaces Zelensky, then I'm not sure what was the grand strategy of that midget at Kremlin. So I really don't think that I wouldn't be that concerned. Maybe the parliamentary elections could be a little bit more problematic because you would see some parties that are more Russia sympathetic even now, trying to get some kind of support from different people. But Ukrainian society today is a different society. That is also must be taken into account. The absolute majority of Ukrainians, even in the southeast, that was a very problematic region. We're not going to lie, it was a super problematic region in terms of NATO and EU accession. But even those people are now in support of NATO membership. So Russia did a lot of favors in a way through its bloodshed and so on, but it really managed to kind of change our society. So whichever president wins the election, should it take place in 2025, that president is going to be still pro-Ukraine, pro-NATO, pro-EU. It's not going to be some kind of I don't know, Aristovich, but I don't know what Aristovich's agenda is, to be
Yeah.
honest. Just
And
he's
and
just a,
even,
he's
Private Sector and various
a
left and right, they're gonna
yeah.
poll a pretty small
Yeah.
percentage of the.
No, I'd rather not talk about him at all because he's this today, wherever the wind blows or something. That's what Aristovich is. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And Russia might be deluded enough to think that there's this well of resentment amongst Russian language speakers or those whose first language is Russian. They might believe they can weaponize it. I don't get that sense. I mean, maybe people in the occupied territories are brainwashed, or the least active members of society have been kind of stranded there. They're not going to get a vote anyway. I mean, those in the occupied territories are not going to form
Yeah.
part of this free and democratic vote anyway. So I don't see them being able to weaponize the Russian language at this point within Ukrainian society.
It's not even about the Russian language. I mean, it's mostly about the regions, not really the Russian language, because the Russian language is spoken, in many parts of Ukraine. I
Not
would have
Lviv,
thought
it's not, but yeah,
Lviv, no,
yeah.
but Lviv is an exception more or less. In other parts like Vinnytsia and so on, still speak a lot of Russian.
I
But that's
found that it was interesting because
Mhm.
people won't, they really, really don't want to speak it, and for obvious kind of reasons. But if you don't have a common language, and if they're really curious to understand why you're there and what you're doing, then yeah, I did have conversations. Once people were, not in a group or on the street, and they're in a car or something, if they really wanted to have a conversation with you, it would happen, and you'd converse in Russian. So
Always. Yeah, but I just want to add that I don't really see the election being such a big threat in terms of destabilize. How will it destabilize? I really don't know. So either Zelensky is reelected and you give him like another 5 years of legitimacy, or Zaluzhny, you give him the opportunity, or you have Poroshenko, which is I don't know, that dude, no, maybe not, but even he is not such a bad option. So
no,
who
and
else?
he
Yeah,
might have changed. He didn't do an awful lot for the army, and he covered up for a lot of the failure to advance the army under his. But he now knows under full scale invasion, it may well be that his own perspective has changed. His priorities may have changed. So none
well,
of
at
those
least
three are
that his
disasters, right?
chocolate factory in Russia has been shut down. That would be nice.
Yeah, his chocolate factory is gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because I don't keep track of his personal doings, but I would say that that one was just, you fight Russia with chocolate factory in Russia. Like, okay, gotcha, gotcha. And and somehow he still managed to come off as this more pro-Ukraine candidate,
Yeah.
which always baffled me. Like, it's a little bit like this Trump situation too. Like, how can you like? I don't understand. Why would you say that Poroshenko is more pro-Ukraine when indeed he was an oligarch who cooperated with all of them?
Absolutely. It's
Absolutely.
like fighting an opponent when the opponent's got your balls in a vice. You're really gonna pull your punches, aren't you? Which is what he
Yeah,
did.
he was part of every filthy coalition and group of people you could imagine him to be with. So I mean, to me, this is very incomprehensible. And then Zelensky came and he was accused of being pro-Russian. Like, why is Zelensky pro-Russian? Oh, because he wants to stop the war. Well, any person,
Yeah.
sane person, wants to stop the war.
I
The
think
question
his
is, can you
speeches,
stop?
I mean, this is an interesting thing because I'm tracking, the changes in Zelensky. And if you listen to some of his early speeches, I don't think it's that he's pro-Russian, but he is sympathetic to Russian culture. He is perhaps naive about some of the ways in which the Kremlin act. I don't think he's naive any longer. There's been an extraordinary process of change and evolution as he's come to understand the nature of Russian aggression.
Jonathan, I mean, it's good you say that, but a lot of Ukrainians that I know of, they were critical of him even in 2022 when he was doing his best, right, to defend the country, and they were like, ah, yes, yeah, pro-Russian.
Oh yeah, I hear that now still. I don't
Yeah, I
believe
mean,
that at all.
I don't know what it takes to change your mind, but apparently facts on the ground or it's like I said, this Trump delusion syndrome or whatever it's called. It's the same in a way. It's the same in a way, right? So I don't know. I mean, people are people, the way they perceive things. I only look at processes. I don't focus so much on some person's surname, but I look at the processes at large and try to understand the context of what's happening. And I think the processes today are a little bit more favorable toward Ukraine than they were last year, for example.
Yes,
And
you wouldn't
yeah,
know that from the media, would you? But just this morning I was updating my Russian oil refinery bingo card. There's only like two or three left that haven't been
yeah.
ticked off, and in that respect, Ukraine is in a much stronger position, able to inflict long-range harm on Russia, and its ability to inflict harm on the Ukrainian military at a distance is being reduced severely. And even the electricity shortages that were predicted this winter have not really come to pass. It's not been as harsh a winter as was generally feared.
And also, like, you have to take into consideration that since Trump took office and since won the election, nothing has been canceled when it comes to Ukrainians' ability to do things. So the military aid is still there. The sanctions are still there. The long range, even I've heard that now the long range deep strikes are permitted. I don't know 100% whether it's so or not, but obviously somebody gave consent, right? It must have been, yeah, the US. Who else, right? So a lot of things are happening quietly behind, yeah, they're not as conspicuous and publicized as Biden comes out and makes a lovely speech saying something about democracy, bravery, and so on, which is great. But you also have this, like, in Russian, you have this saying that there's lapsha, not no shah. That means that you have like this pasta around.
Noodles on your ears. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
noodles on your ears. It's like, when somebody comes and is like promises, it tells you how awesome you are, and then does nothing. And does nothing behind the doors. So I mean, I think that the processes right now are just fine. We keep striking them, we keep inflicting damage, we keep doing something. And yes, the front line is not in the best condition, but it's not crumbling either. So we need to stop to make sure that it doesn't crumble to begin with. We need to stop, like, to somehow balance it, even it out. I don't know.
And there are many
And
more recruits. I mean, there are still tens of thousands of recruits working their way through European training programs. So I understand there aren't enough people, and there are a lot of people on the front who are, exhausted and haven't been on rotation. But it seems on balance, Ukraine is in a better position to keep replenishing, despite what the media says, which constantly sort of talks down Ukraine's position vis-a-vis Russia.
the media likes to talk things. The media likes to dramatize. That's how they make money. That's how they get the clicks, right? Otherwise, if you say that everything is more or less fine, that's not what the audience wants to hear. There always must be some sort of narrative as to who's winning, and you can't be boring. You need to come up with something all the time. I wouldn't say that Ukraine's position is, I don't know, like, great. that it has like all these resources when it comes to replenishment. No, I wouldn't say that. I think that the morale in general is down a lot. And I know that a lot of people are avoiding conscription and so on. But, the first I see that this process happening as the first thing you need to do is you need to stop the advance. That stall, just stall it, like in a way. So you can't move anymore. Every bit of that front line must stop. Then you can have a negotiation, I guess, of some sort as to how you proceed. With Russia, you can't have a negotiation saying that, dude, we stopped your advance. There it is. Hop. And now we think, how do we like what's going to happen next? If you say that, because I believe that Russia will say, no, we want to continue doing that. You know, we will recruit even more people from North Korea, maybe from Iran. I don't know. It's maybe from somewhere else, some other Russia, Hamas maybe is the ones to join the fight. I don't know, Hezbollah. But either Russia says that, okay, we're gonna recruit more people. We're gonna push. We're gonna push. We're not happy. We're gonna like break the front line again. And then I think that the US won't really have any other option but to do something about it, you know, to do something about it, as in shock therapy. Okay, well, if you say that you don't want any ceasefire, you don't want any deal, you're done. Because even some conservative commentators, because I do check out what conservative commentators have to say, they do give a perspective. Because like lots of the media that I read give only one perspective, but they give the other perspective, and there's a lot of good things there. I wouldn't say, I mean, not all of what they say makes sense to me, but a lot of it does. And there was this interview with Gordon Sondland, who's Trump's ex ambassador to the EU, and he said that pretty much what I said right now. If you take one more inch, if there's a ceasefire deal of some sort, and we temporarily leave some of our occupied territory to Russia without recognizing it officially, because that's a big no. And I think that it should be like that. And no Ukrainian should be recognizing it officially. A temporary, I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you give in return. But what I'm trying to say here is that he said that if basically Putin says that no, we're gonna take more land, that's gonna be it for Putin. And it kind of makes sense because this is a situation that's an impasse for Russia, a certain cul-de-sac, because their goal has never changed. Our goal never changed. We want the 1991 border back, and their goal is to subjugate all of Ukraine. All of Ukraine, not parts of Ukraine, not take a little bit here or take a little bit there, but the entire country. And I think that, a situation like that, there's only one party that will have to prevail.
Well, I think we need to unpack these as things develop, as a potential Trump plan or the outlines of negotiations or even non-negotiations, because I fundamentally believe Putin does not want to negotiate as long as he believes he can still win, whatever winning means in his frame of reference. But we'll have to pick this up in the next episode. Lesia, thanks so much.
You.